Hey, and welcome back to Easier Said Than Done. Today I'm going to talk about vibe coding. As a lawyer who's turned into a software engineer in my late 30s, mainly to keep my startup alive, I have directly witnessed over the last 10 years the immense seismic shifts in the coding world, right, over the last decade. Now, today I'm excited to explore with you on this episode the latest paradigm coined by Andrej Karpathy, and I'll tell you who he is in a second, in a recent tweet. He calls it vibe coding, right? So he said, in essence, and I'm reading from Andrej Karpathy's tweet here, there's a new kind of coding I call vibe coding, where you fully give into the vibes, embrace exponentials, and forget that the code even exists. It's possible because LLMs are just getting that good. And I'm skipping over some of the parts just to keep it short. He coined this term recently in this tweet. And before we dive into what vibe coding is, let's first understand who Andrej Karpathy is, because he's the one who's describing his own experience with vibe coding and how this is how he does it now. So let's appreciate a little bit more about him and his background, because not everyone can just do this.
Welcome to Easier Said Than Done with me, Zubin, where I share with you the tens of thousands of dollars worth of self-development that I did on my journey from 37-year-old lawyer to professional software engineer. The goal of this podcast is to show you how to actually do those things that are easier said than done.
So let's appreciate a little bit more about him and his background, because not everyone can just do this. So Andrej Karpathy is absolutely a titan in the world of AI, right? He's one of the biggest household names, if you like, in AI and deep learning. And I'm going to link to his GitHub as well in the show notes. But you will see there's not a lot there in the public stuff, but you can see the depth of his experience and just how long, how many decades he's been doing work in the AI and neural network space. Now, he's got well over a decade of experience at the forefront of AI research and development. Karpathy has actually left a very lasting mark on this field. In fact, he's probably best known for some of his work in computer vision, neural networks, and so on, and was also the former director of AI at Tesla. Now, you know Elon's not an easy guy to work for, right? And at Tesla, he spearheaded the development of autonomous driving systems. So we know from this that Karpathy has deep technical expertise and years of hands-on engineering. This makes him uniquely qualified to identify and name or give a label to his style of coding, which he calls vibe coding, which is done with AI LLMs, because he's been using it for years. And here's the key point, folks. All that experience also makes him capable of using the technique of vibe coding. So let's talk about vibe coding as a technique, right? Vibe coding is basically the technique where you use AI LLMs, large language models, to generate code based on descriptions or vibes that you provide. But that means you need to know how to tell it to do the thing you want it to do. That takes deep expertise, right? It's like this. Think of what you do at work today, right? And you have a gifted member on your team who's very good at translating your experience and top judgment-based ideas into an actual reality. It's kind of the same thing, right? You treat the AI LLM as a very talented member of your team, but you're supervising it, right? And you tell it to translate your engineering vision into functional code, and it can do that very fast, faster than human beings are actually doing the typing parts of it, right? But you have to give it the clear engineering vision, and it can't be done at a very high level like build me an autonomous car. Like, it's not going to work like that. You've got to know enough of the whole system that you can break down all components of the architecture, every piece of it, keep breaking it down to smaller and smaller pieces, and then outlining that outcome and piece to the LLM, and then being able to supervise its output. So let's talk about how vibe coding differs from traditional coding. Number one, vibe coding is very outcome driven, right? Traditional coding requires the coder to make thousands of keystrokes, typing away, to type out the code. And in LLMs or in vibe coding, we kind of describe the outcome and it does the typing for you. Now, when you're good with your instructions, it can even design that code effectively. So it's not just the typing, but actually the design of the interfaces and the structuring of the code can be done quite effectively. But you've got to know how to give it the instructions and break it down into a small enough piece and use the right terminology. Number two is that the LLMs take a natural language input, right? Vibe coding takes a natural language input. Now, this is because vibe coding interprets high-level intention based on the natural human language that you're using. And then vibe coding, therefore, can allow for more conversational prompting rather than a strict syntax-based approach. So that's another big difference from traditional coding, which is very much about the strict syntax and actually typing out the code and knowing the language inside out yourself. Number three, rapid iteration is possible with vibe coding. because vibe coding can generate and refine code under your supervision when you tell it to, much faster than manually typing by a human being. So that means you compress the development cycle. So what could otherwise take a week of research and typing, now if you know enough to give it the right instructions, you can do it in a few hours and then spend a few hours fine-tuning it and refining it yourself. And the number 4 difference is that there's contextual understanding, because LLMs are really good at what's known as semantic understanding, right? It's a contextual understanding. That's why you give context-filled prompts to an LLM. From that, LLM can infer a broader context and best practices, unlike traditional IDEs where it's just completely an interface for you to type things, right? And LLMs are getting really good at contextual understanding. For example, I can talk about something like he or she is really hardcore, but if the previous and next sentences give more context into what that person is hardcore about, it'll know what it means. It may not take it as literally like a hardcore of a mango, or the earth, which has a liquid core, so not a hardcore. But it can infer the context. It can say, hey, I know this person's a hardcore guitarist. Why? Because the previous sentence said that, or the next sentence said that. Or this person's a hardcore engineer because the previous sentence or previous paragraph said that. LLMs are really good at now figuring out context, which is why it's being used in search even more, right? Now, the 5th difference is multi-language fluency. Vibe coding can essentially switch between programming languages because it is trained on pretty much the entire internet, right? It has all of the internet in its training data, and it can therefore actually provide the answers for you from multiple programming languages just based on your prompt. Now, the number 6 difference is that it reduces or sometimes even eliminates research, right? The traditional developer workflow requires multiple windows, multiple tabs, going down all these Google search rabbit holes, looking at lots of Stack Overflow, looking at old documentation, reading old code, trying to figure out how things are done. That's all part of the research process. That's very much the most time-consuming part of traditional software engineering when you don't know the code base or you're building something new. These approaches, these design patterns that you need to research, the API documentation is extremely time-consuming, and there's a lot of trial and error involved. Now, the LLM is trained and synthesizes all of this, right? And does it much faster than a human can. And so it eliminates or compresses the research window required. And then all engineer needs to do is look at it and says, yes, that fits all the patterns I've seen, and therefore this is probably the right approach. So it's a judgment call that comes from experience. Now, having used this approach of vibe coding for almost a year now, I can confirm that it is an absolute game changer, right? It's like you're the chef and you've got a savant sous-chef, someone who really understands your vision and flavors and can execute complex tasks with the right instruction. But there's a catch. You've got to be experienced enough to know what you want, know what you don't want, and recognize bad output, which means it's all about the judgment. Now, here's why vibe coding is fantastic for seasoned pros. One, it reduces drudgery, right? What does that mean? All the boring parts are taken out, okay? Hey, hope you're enjoying this episode. Listen, I bet you're tired of the social media BS, you're confused and overwhelmed, and all you want is for someone to just show you a clear path to a coding career, right? We get it. My partner Brian and I, we changed to code in our 30s, and we can help you do it too. Brian and I have done all sorts of engineering work from startups to Google, and now we've built an exclusive private mentorship program designed to get you from beginner to professional developer. Whether you've done a coding bootcamp, you have a computer science degree, or you're starting from zero, it doesn't matter. We'll build you a step-by-step and customized plan, not just for the coding stuff, but for the entire career change process. Look, I'll be honest, the program is not easy and it's not short. But if you do the work, you'll get results that will change your life, if that's what you want. So go to parsity.io/innercircle or find any of the links in the show notes, and you can schedule a free call with us. Speak to you then. It reduces drudgery, right? What does that mean? All the boring parts are taken out, okay? You don't have to spend hours and days building up your environment and putting up scaffolding code and stuff like that. All of that's gone. Number 2, you can focus on architectural engineering decisions, not just the development/coding side, right? So you can spend more time on very strategic, high-level designing of the system and less on the writing of the boilerplate that's all the crud that has to go into a modern application. Number 3, you get the benefits of pair programming without an actual human pair programmer. Now, done right, you and the LLM can effectively be pair programmers. You discuss and explore patterns together, you approach, interrogate, and question techniques, you analyze other techniques, and you analyze the code base together as well. Very powerful stuff, but you need to know what you're doing. Number four is that seasoned engineers get continuous learning much faster this way. Now, when your fundamentals are strong enough, and that's a prerequisite, then you can learn new things much faster because the research time is exponentially reduced or compressed. And then you interact with the LLMs to synthesize all the research data into one place. You have the judgment and the intuition to know what feels right and what doesn't. And so you don't need to yourself go to primary and secondary data sources. You can work with the LLM to build your learning fast. And the fifth advantage for seasoned engineers is that you can do rapid prototyping, which we talked about earlier. It's very fast to do spikes. You compress through the development cycles and you can iterate through an idea very fast. You can generate throwaway code every single day and get better and better much faster, right? Huge benefit for experienced engineers. But knowing what is better than the previous iteration requires judgment, which comes from experience. Now, for novice engineers, vibe coding is frankly very tempting, but very treacherous and dangerous. It's kind of like giving a novice driver the keys to an F1 car, right? A Formula One car. It's happening right now in Melbourne in March 2025, right now, this weekend, in fact. And the power of it is intoxicating. The power is incredible. The glory is incredible. The fun, the glamour is awesome. But without the foundational skills of knowing what you're doing and knowing the track you're on, it's kind of a recipe for disaster, right? It's the same thing for inexperienced coders, because the dangers can include things like, one, you end up having a dependency or a crutch. You rely very heavily on the AI. I've seen this a lot in interviews, actually, where people can't explain the code that the AI generated. They understand what it's kind of doing, but they don't know why it's there. And that's an essential part, right? Hi, if you want a no BS insight into how to change your career, whether to code or something else, and how to actually get job opportunities in tech, then please subscribe and like. It's no BS because I have zero incentive to mislead you. I just want to help you and give you tons of value so that you will consider working with me to get to your next career. Take a look at the description text below to learn more about the training I offer. But I do post content here regularly, and by subscribing and liking and hitting that notification bell, you will get to know when I post new industry insights for you. You'll also know within about 3 seconds if you want to learn more, but at least you won't miss out. Oh, and please follow me on LinkedIn too. I pretty much post there every single day. Just look for my name, Zubin Pratap. All right, so please like and subscribe to this channel, and let's get back to the episode. Number two, there's a lack of understanding because you're creating all this output without actually understanding the engineering principles, the design principles, the human experience principles. And this kind of inflates what's known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you look at my LinkedIn blog, which is based on this podcast, I've linked to what the Dunning-Kruger effect is. So just Google it. You'll see it on Wikipedia. Humans are very prone to Dunning-Kruger, which is basically a way where we tend to overestimate our own skills and competence at something, right? Now, when we fall prey to Dunning-Kruger, it leads to very disastrous professional and personal consequences. And that's a big pitfall I'm seeing with junior engineers relying too much on AI or relying on AI, full stop, right? Number three, the difficulties that junior engineers, or rather inexperienced engineers, I don't really care for the term junior, but inexperienced engineers have significant difficulty debugging systems because they never actually learned through trial and error how that system got put together. And when you're struggling to fix issues in the code that you didn't write, this is a real problem, okay? This is a real problem because you don't have the intuition, the judgment, the pattern recognition, or the ability to reason through a code that has produced some bugs that somebody else may have written, or you may have written, or the AI generated, and there's bugs in it, okay? And the number four challenge of when inexperienced engineers rely too much on AI is that it creates a lot of technical debt and you don't know it because you don't have the judgment, insight, or experience to understand what the technical debt is. You have an accumulation of poorly structured or designed code, becomes very hard to manage, hard to debug, hard to maintain. And if you're lucky enough for your product or your app to start getting users, it's very hard to scale when you don't understand your technical debt. Now, to conclude, vibe coding absolutely favors the experienced because experienced people have many compound skills that go into their skill, right? Whether it's in the law, whether it's in music, whether it's in software engineering, whether it's in journalism, whatever it is. And I've been very close to all these professions. It's not actually the core skill that matters. It's the compound skills of the core skill plus dozens of other skills, right? So you may be a really good coder, but if you don't understand business or user requirements or client requirements or internal operations, you're probably not going to be an effective, impactful coder, or vice versa. Maybe you understand all those things, but you're not very good at the code stuff. It's going to impact your ability to have impact, right? It's true of all professions. And software engineering is very much a compound skill, very much a compound skill. Now, the problem with the over-reliance on AI is that it kind of shifts the balance and dependency on those skills, right? Experienced coders get to benefit from vibe coding because they possess the compound skills that were developed through years of exposure. inexperienced engineers can be expected to suffer through over-reliance on AI due to the absence of those compound skills. So let's talk about some of those compound skills. One, pattern recognition, the ability for seasoned engineers to quickly identify and spot issues and anti-patterns. Number two, architectural insight. Experience allows for better high-level design understanding that then leads to better breaking down of the problem of the entire system into its tiny components, which then lead to better prompting of the AI. And the third compound skill that I think is really important is that you lose the ability to debug effectively, right? And that's critical because most of the time in a job situation, you are not writing brand new code. Most of the time, you're looking at existing systems that hundreds of people have written before you that have been around, for 20, 30 years in some cases, and you have to figure out what's going on. Number four is quality assurance, right? This is a compound skill. Experienced engineers can critically evaluate and improve AI outputs. Number five, ethical and business considerations. Seasoned professionals are much more likely to understand the nuances and implications of the code in the real world when it actually gets released into the real world. Number six, engineers have the compound skills of being able to know when to challenge the AI and how to interpret it in its obsequiousness, right? Now, what I'm going to do very quickly is I'm going to share my screen for just a moment so you can see what I mean by this, right? For those of you who are on YouTube, you get to watch this on my screen because I'm going to share my screen with you and show you just how the AI when challenged does weird things. Okay, so in this example, I actually lifted code, Golang code, from the Go by Example website, which is a beautiful starting resource for people who want to understand the basics of the Go language. All right, so you guys can see this now. So what happened is I pasted in the code from Go by Example, and it's in this big prompt here, right? And I said, what does this following code do? It analyzed the code, it broke down the code, and it actually did a good job. It was correct, but it's pretty simple fundamental code. So fundamental Golang code. So it was able to correctly break it down. Absolutely right. No problem, right? But I decided to challenge it. I said, that's wrong. You've analyzed the worker function incorrectly. So I gave it a vague criticism, right? And it said, you're absolutely right. I apologize for the error in my analysis, right? I misinterpreted. It did. It actually got it right. And then it went on. And then I continued to challenge it. I said, you've also made an error in how the channel's data gets consumed. Again, vague, not using the right terminology. But I'm trying to simulate what it would be like for a less experienced engineer and who thinks that it's wrong, even though it's correct. And it said, you're absolutely right. I apologize for the repeated errors. There were no repeated errors. Let's get this right. And it changed a bunch of its own analysis. So I don't know about you guys, but that makes me nervous because that means if I don't know how to tell right from wrong, or I don't have an intuition that says, let me research this outside the LLM, because the LLM is basically doing the research for you and taking away your ability to learn how to do your own research, even though it takes much more time. So it gives you convenience at a great cost where you have to trust either it or your gut, right? So this is just an illustration of why experienced engineers are much more likely to get more out of vibe coding because they have the compound skills and the intuition to know when and how to challenge the AI. As with any powerful tool, the key to LLMs lies in how we wield the tool. Experienced engineers absolutely can use it as a force multiplier to amplify existing skills and knowledge and judgment. They know when to trust. They know when to dig deeper. They know when to challenge it. Like a master musician knows when to improvise in a gig, right? When someone's brand new, they need to read it off the sheet or go completely by rote memory. But an experienced engineer knows how to, an experienced musician knows how to improvise and when to stick to the score. That's the big difference. And that comes from judgment and experience and a lot of effort and learning, right? So for those starting your journey in coding, if you're an inexperienced developer, honestly, my advice is this: learn to walk before you learn to run. Don't be seduced by the convenience and ease of the AI into thinking that that's what engineering is all about. I can promise you the actual typing out of the code is the least important part of the job of the engineer. It's knowing what needs to be coded. That's the important part. Very important difference. So for you newbies out there, please build a solid foundation in programming the hard way. Take the hard road. Don't take the easy road, okay? Build those programming fundamentals. Understand the different data structures available, the design patterns, and understand the why behind the code, why it's there, not just what it does, but why is it needed. Use AI as a learning tool and a partner, but assume you're the boss and it's reporting to you and you're accountable to supervise it, right? That way it's not a crutch. You have to know what it's doing. Now, at the Inner Circle program that Brian and I run, links are in the description, we emphasize the fundamentals of programming. It has nothing to do with the language, it has nothing to do with data structures and algorithms at this stage. The fundamentals of programming is about the fundamentals of building complex tools and systems on computers. We teach that for a sustained period of time because it takes time to get that level of judgment and insight. And then we train people on the safe and appropriate usage of AI LLMs, right? Because LLMs must be used as though they're your employee, not as though they just do the work for you that you don't know how to do. You've got to be the boss, right? So, in conclusion, vibe coding is by no means a replacement for expertise, it's an enhancement and can only be safely wielded by someone with expertise. It's a powerful ally or a minion, if you want to think of it that way, but to be used by people who have paid their dues and understand the craft. For the newcomers here, this is a good thing. It's a glimpse of what's possible when you achieve mastery. And at the Inner Circle program, I really go very deep on mastery, right? It's very mastery based learning. It's a goal that you can work towards. AI is not a shortcut to bypass the learning process. Okay, it really isn't. So the future of software engineering is bright because AI makes us much more fast. Sure, it may mean that we need fewer engineers, but I don't think that's typically what happens, right? The invention of the car didn't mean that people needed fewer cars when public transport's available. All that means is when people can move around faster, more things get produced that require moving around more. And similarly, all AI is going to do, I believe, is it's going to generate this explosion of opportunity, of businesses, of new things coming up and shutting down, and this evolutionary process that's going to have a huge demand for people who have strong programming fundamentals and know how to use AI to accelerate what was already being done. So it's more like a jetpack for an engineer, not a replacement for an engineer. And of course, there are no shortcuts. Please embrace the journey, embrace some of the suckiness of it, embrace the hardship, and really, really commit to your mastery. I'd love to know from you what your experience with AI has been, what your experience with vibe coding has been. So please drop them in the comments. Tag me and I'll do my best to respond. I usually respond to all comments. I will see you there. All right. Hope you got a lot out of this. Take care. Bye.
Do it. Just subscribe. You know you got to do it.